I was with different, friendlier music.
Yeah.
Kind of blew me away, that music. It was very...
Last week, and it was really chill. So it's updated its countdown music. So good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery Season 9, Episode 5, where we are welcomed by, well, Mike, you're apparently welcoming us. We are welcoming Mike Franchina to talk about concepting worlds with Trench Crusade. Welcome to the stream, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, no problem at all. As always, I am joined by a couple of friendly rooks. This week it is Andy Law, the Ringmaster, and Mark Gibbons this year. So welcome to the stream.
Hello, welcome all.
Hello. As always, we've had plenty of questions pre-submitted by patrons on our friendly Discord server. Do join us over there. And we're also this week planning out the rest of the year for lots of exciting Inside the Rookery events coming up, including Chimera Festival in Edinburgh later on this year, where we're starting to think about which authors we will have on and what kind of topics we want to talk about, and planning the rest of the season. So welcome to the stream if you're new, and welcome if you are returning. As always, put your comments in the chat and I will bring them up on screen. For instance, Mark, a regular in the chat, misses the super intense.
Yeah, that sense of dread is gone now, and I kind of,
Good evening to Zolta and Rip Danger, as long as the battery lasts. That's like an intense name to replace our intense countdown, so I approve of that. So, welcome, as I say, to the stream, Mike. I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, why you're here, and then we'll get into the pre-submitted questions.
All right. Yeah, my name's Mike Franchina. I've been an artist and concept artist for a long, long time. I've worked on a bunch of games. Warhammer Online was my first big job. Before that, I just did freelance, and I made like very little money for little RPG companies like Green Ronin, and I worked for a company called Udon, just like these tiny little companies. And but then I went on to bigger and better things, and worked on like some Blizzard games, and eventually left Blizzard to work on Trench Crusade full time. So that's what I've been doing for the past since 2016, really. So it's been really, really fun.
That's where I first encountered your art, actually, was Warhammer Online.
Okay.
We, although you may not remember it, because why would you? We had a big, long conversation once, I believe, over on rpg.net, I think.
Oh, man, that takes me back. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't been on that site forever, but I was
looking still around.
Yeah, it is. I was looking through some of the old art pieces that you had when I was figuring out what I was going to put on the blog post. I was like, wait a minute. I remember these. Wait a minute. We had like chats and stuff in the past, because at that point I was working on the roleplay game. And obviously anything that popped up that was Warhammer adjacent immediately made me go, well, what is this? How exciting. So yeah, that was a fun little walk down memory lane for me.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful website there. And the Kickstarter is still live, am I right? No, it's not live.
Yeah, it's all you can get our stuff on. You can get our STLs on My Mini Factory. You just look up Factory Fortress Inc. on My Mini Factory. You should be able to find it. But yeah, Kickstarter's all done. I still get a lot of emails though. People asking like, "Hey, I missed it. It was like 6 months ago."
Well, I mean, it was. I mean, such a phenomenal. We can get into this as we go. As we dive deeper into the hour. But yeah, as a miniatures-based Kickstarter, it's just for me, it just sort of exploded. The Trench Crusade stuff. Obviously, I was familiar with your work, but to see it all, as it coalesced, as Thomas got involved and James got involved, and it all started to bubble up. And oh, yeah, I felt the energy. I felt the shift. The ripple in the force, the disturbance in the force. It was like, oh shit, this is going to be a big one. And yeah, I mean, yes, it was. It continues to be.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really anticipate it being that big or anything like that. So it was a really pleasant surprise for everybody.
I think it's.
Oh, I was just going to say, just for the folks that don't know, why don't you tell us, Mike, just how well it did? Just so you can blow your own trumpet a little bit and go, toot, toot, toot.
Well, the Kickstarter did 3.3 million, and then like after that, we did like a backer kit, and now we're selling stuff on My Mini Factory. So we're almost up to about like 6 million total sales at this point, which is pretty wild.
I mean, I don't know if it's captured the zeitgeist or whether it's just a perfect sort of combination of imagery and a rule set, and just hitting a spot in the market where there's the gaming community, the miniature, particularly the tabletop miniature community, looking for something fresh and exciting, but it still has a resonance with the stuff that they're familiar with and they really enjoy. And I think Trench Crusade just did that. It felt like a new take on something that was sort of familiar and comfortable, and in a world that they immediately understood and enjoyed, but was like, oh fuck, this is so much cooler than anything else that's out there right now. So, props to the whole team for that.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's based in the real world lets people, you don't need to know a ton of backstory. Like, yeah, in Warhammer you have like these really great, cool characters and stuff, and that's all you really need. But it could be confusing for a lot of people, but for this, it's like, oh, that guy's like a Prussian. Okay, I get that.
Yeah, I think as I said, because it's historical fantasy. There's an immediate resonance to it. It's 100 years ago, little over 100 years ago in this alternate history, and it has real place names. And there's a sense of it's grounded, even though it's sort of wildly imaginative. It's still, there's a sense of, oh, this is rather than it being the 41st millennium, way off. It's like, oh no, it's feels present almost. Yeah,
and I think a lot of people because we've included all these various countries and stuff. We have we have the Scottish. You can play as Scottish people if you want. You can play as Irish people if you want. We have rules for them. So I think there's a little bit of like a World Cup kind of thing where you're like rooting for the home team, for some people anyway. Some people just want to play as like a religious freak or whatever. So that's fine too.
I don't know if this is a reference, if you know Sam, but Sam says, Mark, what's behind the door? But then Sam's followed up with, hey, Mike, what's behind the door in Trench Crusade? So am I missing some kind of door?
He's probably talking about there's a faction called the Temple of the Metamorphosis, and they have like this. There's like a door involved, but we're not really ready to talk about what's behind it. So you should just let your imagination go nuts on that one.
Okay. So let's go into the pre-submitted questions. So here's one from Martine, and Martine has asked, what inspired the art that would develop into the first concepts of what would become Trench Crusade?
I mean, just kind of all the stuff I'm into. I'm like really into weird religious stuff. I'm really into weaponry of various kinds. As like a concept designer, you're always designing like a character that has weapons to fight stuff. And so I was always like getting into like the research in that, like, and learning like the specifics of all these different weapons, and like, learning all about them. And so like I'm really into all that stuff, and I wanted to include all that. So it's really just in like horror movies. I love horror movies, so I wanted everything to have like a big horror bent, and generally it's all the stuff that like I couldn't do at work because it's like for whatever reason, So
even on Diablo, which is pretty horrific. There are boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like a big mass market game, and it can be a little irritating sometimes, but like I think like Diablo wasn't too bad, but the main thing was like when you go to work to design stuff for people, especially characters, everyone has like a million opinions about it, and like they're usually not right about what they think is good.
Well, I mean, that's stuff that I found, particularly at certain studios, the bigger studios. Everybody gets an opinion, and what might have started off as a really original, spiky, unique idea gets all the cool edges sort of buffed off it as it passes through all these hands, and what comes out the end is inevitably sanitized and safe. And you could never say that about Trench Crusade,
right?
No, that's fair.
Yeah, the Trench Crusade will give you tetanus, I think.
That's a marketing banner right there. Have you had your tetanus shots before you get this game?
Well, thanks to Sir Melian for the super chat. So they say, big fan of the art ever since the Torchlight games. Wild to see how much style has changed, but can still feel some of the same vibes as Ezro here and such.
Oh yeah,
Do you want to talk a bit about that, like how your background has influenced like you today as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, working on when I was like freelancing way in the beginning of my career, I was just trying to emulate the illustrators I was like into, like Mark Zug, Wayne Reynolds, Steve Prescott I was really into. And then, when I got the job on Warhammer, Warhammer is so much more like gritty and dark. So I started to like, really learn how to like paint like the textures and like the gritty textures and all this stuff with the characters. And as when I got the job at Runic on Torchlight, that's like a very stylized in the vein of like World of Warcraft. But that was really fun in its own way because you're not spending all this time texturing or rendering. It's all about like interesting shapes for your characters that read well at like a small size on the screen. So that was like a cool learning process. And the nice thing about Runic was like it was super fast to do concepts because it's just like a pencil sketch and a quick color pass and like you're done. So, but that taught me a lot about like boiling down a design to something like has an interesting shape and like an interesting sort of idea to it without like covering it in like super rendered textures.
That's what I found as well at Blizzard. It's all super. I mean, I thought I drew big shoulder pads at Games Workshop, and then I went to work in Blizzard. No, not really. Yeah.
These are rookie shoulder pads.
Right. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Sam, there's a cat. These cats are not allowed in this room. There was a lock fail, a hook fail, and this is our new kitten Manfred, and he is extremely naughty. So yeah, I'm gonna bring up a question and then I'm gonna get rid of him because there's so much in this room that could, kill him if he swallows it. So here we go. So Martin says, when do you think it's best to start working on concept art during the world building process to ensure minimal wastage of time and effort? So interesting question that Mark and Andy, as a concept art and also Andy as a producer, you might want to jump in on after Mike.
Sure.
For me, it's all together. So like the concept art and the world building and the lore writing that I do, as like loose and weird as it is, it's all like part of the same process. So like I just do it all at the same time.
I think they go hand in hand. And honestly, concept art it's rare that any of it is wasted because you. I mean, if you're creating it all yourself, then obviously it's all sort of simultaneous. But when you're working with writers, there's the back and forth and the bouncing of ideas. You might get some text in, and you go and draw something, and it inspires you to draw something else, and you give that fresh drawing back to the writer, and the writer is inspired to take that and develop it. It's for me, it's all about that sort of open communication between art and design. That needs to happen as soon as possible. Because that's what generates that's where the quality stuff comes from. Nobody should be sitting there locking their writing or their art away until it's finished and ready to present. It's like no, get that conversation going early and get that back and forth and get comfortable with that back and forth and get comfortable with having your artwork or your writing tossed out, because that's what happens. That's how you get better stuff. Not being precious about it and getting that. So yeah, I don't see any of it as a waste of time and effort, unless you said you've locked yourself away and not sharing your work, in which case you set yourself up for disaster at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it depends too, like what exactly like your level of concept art is. Like if you're doing like these like highly rendered pieces, maybe that could be too much. Like all my stuff is like really sketches at first in my sketchbook, and I would build the world in my sketchbook. So I'm doing these sketches, I'm writing lore. I'm coming up with ideas for them, and then once I have something that I'm really happy with, then I would go and render it. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'll give an interesting little tale on this one. Pardon me. I came from on the role play side. A background where all the writers would write everything. They'd send it off to the developer, producer, whatever. Then that art director would then step in and go, right, what do I have? I require 5 illustrations of this or one of these. And the art would almost always come in second. Almost always, without fail. And that was what I was exposed to for a good almost 10 years. And I remember the day when it broke. And it broke several people involved as well. And it was kind of funny to see in practice and also horrific. When we were getting pinged by Geek and Sundry, I mentioned this before the stream when I was going away, and there was a world getting built called Titan's Grave. And it was getting built by Will Wheaton of Star Trek fame. Because they were using it for their Board Game Geek show that they had, but it was going to be the role play side of it. And they commissioned interestingly enough, Green Ronin, to go back to another company that we were talking about earlier in the stream, to build that world. And Green Ronin started building and thinking, oh, I'm going to include this and include that. And they had chats with Will, and away it went. And then they decided they wanted a map, and they got a quick ping over to me. And I was sitting in a call with Will, a big long call that lasted for quite some time. And he explained everything about the world. And then at the end of it, having really learned nothing about their world, other than how exciting it was, I started trying to pin down some details, and he decided he didn't want to give any details. And his exact words in it were, just go wild, in terms of what to create. And I said, right, so I've got free reign to just go build shit? Cool, I mean, excellent. But are you sure you want to do this, given there's an entire writing team building parts of this world? Perhaps I could get access to that, and then I could build around what they're doing. And he was like, no, I don't want that, because I want to see your ideas for what the world should be. Away you go. And this broke the writing team for a host of reasons, because the world that I was creating outside of the open communication that should have been there was completely different to what they were creating. But fortunately, I knew the people involved, so I kind of went underhand, had a big long chat with them, and found out where everything was, did the very communication that Mark was discussing, and we came up with something that worked brilliantly for all sides at once. But it was really interesting to see what was from Will's side the way that it should be done, which in his perspective, it's always art first, not writing. Always art first, because you can then give that to the writers and say, be inspired. I don't care if you use it. Be inspired. Go. And then it goes back and forth between as they all discuss, and it moves from that point. But he came from a more LA version of doing it, where often the concepting for the everything would be done first, then the writers would be pulling on top of that. And that for me was a fascinating process to be involved with, because you got all of the benefits and not too many of the downsides of the lack of communication, and also the actual communication that came through afterwards. It was an interesting process, but it changed how I viewed everything pretty much from that point onwards, because at that point I had been exposed to writing first, and I was wrong. Very wrong.
Yeah, I think that certainly, I guess the Will's, Hollywood writers' room, whereas writing is very much a team process. And I think I can understand why. Oh no, we got the art first because the writing will come later, because it's as we've all heard stories, right, of scripts being rewritten on the day of filming, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. So you've got to have all the visuals in place first. So I can understand why that would be his approach for sure.
I think too, like if you have if it's purely writer first, I think sometimes you might also get, at least with some of the old D&D monsters, it's like it has 3 legs growing out of its forehead, and it's like kind of silly. I mean, maybe that's just like the quality of the writers back then, but maybe they're not thinking visually enough. A lot of those old D&D monsters are pretty silly,
And a big welcome to our World Anvil crew who are lighting up the trench today instead of lighting up the forge. So today we're talking to Mike Franchina about Trench Crusade. So concepting worlds, so very world building for the World Anvil crew who've just arrived. So Taylor asks in the chat, so which style do you guys prefer, a collaborative approach or more being given the materials first? I think I'm hearing that you guys prefer the collaborative approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ideal. I mean, sometimes it's nice, certainly if you're working on an established franchise or an established property and world, it's like, okay, it's all there for me. All I got to do is sort of shape it and do some cool art or some cool designs that reflect that. That's sometimes really nice. I did some stuff last time I was at Games Workshop when they had the battle games of Middle Earth. I got on my schedule was do some concepts for the Necromancer, which was Sauron went during the time of the Hobbit when he was in Dol Guldur. Okay, but it's so reflective of the movies, right? But not a Sauron we've seen before. Oh, so you've got plenty to right. So plenty to be going on with, but also invited to put your own spin on it. So that can be sometimes very exciting.
I would love to see those concepts.
Oh, I'll send them over.
Hell yeah.
How exciting.
I completely agree. Collaborative is pretty much always better, but I'll reinforce the point when you're working on an established world, because when you're working on that, you can't just go driving steam ahead either on art or on the writing side, because you're working within a host of established frameworks, and that's fine. Away you go. That's totally cool. And often you'll find that people who are working on established IPs, particularly if they're working for a fixed license or whatever, they will just do everything in fixed blocks because it's generally faster and it's easy to pass from one team to another team to another team. For example, the writing team does all the writing bits, then the art team comes in to support whatever has been written. And it makes sense to have those blocks, but you can see why when you're working on an entirely new project, something that's fresh and exciting, and you're really trying to create something evocative and awesome, that having everybody working together is always the best outcome, rather than just having the writers go squirrel away and say, I have created the thing. And then once they've done that, everyone goes, but have you considered this? And they go, no, I haven't. Maybe I should start writing again. Oh, God damn it. So yeah, working together in a collaborative approach pretty much always wins for me in that regard.
So another question from Martine for you, Mike. So many of your images, lean towards the macabre and the bizarre. What is the fascination?
I just love horror movies and horror novels and stuff. So I think that's pretty much it, you know. And I'm into like all sorts of weird shit. So, you know, I have a lot of like weird reference images of, you know.
I can imagine, yeah. Well, I think when I first sort of jumped into Trench Crusade myself, going through, trawling through all the art and looking at the because there's a lot of very, very intense detail in a lot of concept work, and we're like, I don't really want to see where you drew reference to where it's from, but it's translated really, really well.
I have a pretty nasty like folder full of all sorts of horrible reference.
Please don't look at my search
Did
history.
you have a particular interest in the First World War?
Yeah, I mean, I like it in the sense that, like, I love it's like the meeting of like Napoleonic stuff and like industrial modern warfare. And I think it's such a weird like edge case or whatever we want to call it, where it's not like today's gear is like very tactical and like it just doesn't have the same vibe. It's just not like the guns all have like plastic stocks and they look like toys, like Nerf guns. They're just dumb. So like I like the older stuff. It looks cooler. There's more like filigree on things. Like you have the Prussians with those stupid pickle hob helmets. I know people love them, but they're goofy as hell, with the spike and everything. But I love that.
We had Mappa Monday on last week talking, and we got onto the First World War and history and mapping Europe. And I was saying that my history teacher at high school was obsessed with the First World War and had one of those helmets and would like walk up and down between the desks and absolutely terrify us. But it was weird that we got into talking about that last week. But we went to the battlefields tour. So if you did third year, like standard grade history, you did that. It was a big thing in Scotland and particularly for our school. And I think it was like the first. It is that peculiar meeting because it's like a war that you could reach backwards and touch. Like we were at the Menin Gate, like looking for my great uncle who had died, and it turned out that we didn't find him in the end because I found him much later. He'd actually emigrated to Canada like the year that he had joined up, so he was with the Canadian Auxiliary Force, not with the British Auxiliary Force. My friend like found her great granddad, her great uncle as well, and I found that like bizarrely, like it is that meeting of like they still had horses and carts and but at the same time we could kind of reach back and touch it. So I'm quite obsessed with the First World War for that reason. And we often like talk about now, like it always goes back to the shot heard around the world and like kind of that whole, like it's embedded into the the psyche of a certain generation of Scottish people because of the history we did. So I'm a bit obsessed with it.
Yeah, and I think
plus nurse ghosts. Like, not really.
Did you say nurse ghosts?
Yeah, nurse ghosts.
Yeah, my daughter once made a list of ghosts. They suspected there was a nurse in their school. Their school was built around the First World War, and she had a list of potential ghosts, including, of course, the nurse ghost. Because, like, nurse ghosts are a thing. Like, yeah, the lady with the lamp.
No, I had a giant syringe.
Yeah, giant syringe.
Yeah, that's more Trench Crusade.
Dripping. Oh,
Well, I read a fantastic book, a series of books about London, the history of London. The one, City of the Dead, which is about London and its dead, and that the First World War represented a quantum shift in the way the British grieved, because war prior to that there'd been a sort of, I guess, nobility to it.
Yeah.
And the First World War industrialized war, and therefore industrialized death. And when a relative died in Victorian London, you grieved for like a year. There was a prescribed grieving time, and suddenly, the youth, the British young men were wiped off the planet. You couldn't afford to spend a year grieving. The death was everywhere, and it sort of changed the way people thought about losing loved ones. So the psychic ripples of the First World War were vast. Yeah.
I work in a bank, for a bank in my day job, and every bank you go into, you will see the plaque on the wall, right? Every company that was around then, every school, everywhere you go in the UK, you will find the Great War, and then there's usually like an addendum for the Second World War. And there's a couple, there's like maybe not very many. They're called like thankful villages, thankful towns.
Yeah.
There's none in Scotland. There's some in England.
4 in Wales. There's 4 in Wales.
Yeah. Where nobody died. But we were watching a TV show, a thriller, and they'd gone to Switzerland, and they'd gone to a bank in Switzerland to take some money out, and they walked into the bank, and I just said to Andy, that wasn't filmed in Switzerland. No way. It's not in Switzerland. And he was like, how do you know? And I'm like, because in the background there was a big list. It's in Austria. They couldn't afford to go to Switzerland, or they couldn't get permission, so they picked an Austrian bank. And we looked it up, and sure enough, it was a bank in Austria, because it was just so sunk into our consciousness. I was like, it can't be a Swiss bank. They don't have who died in the First World War. They were neutral. So yeah, I think part of that's why the bottled lightning that someone made in the comment about Trench Crusade, because for a certain generation and a couple of generations, it's it's just sunk deep into our consciousnesses.
Yeah, and I think the First World War, it always felt like, as far as wars go, maybe more horrific than others, because it's like you're just in a trench getting shelled like all day, and there's mud and rats and lice, and I mean, you don't really have to like push it very far at all to make it horrible. I mean, the stuff we've probably done made it more fantastical and made it more palatable, probably, because like, I don't know if you've watched the new All Quiet on the Western Front movie, but like it's like a horror movie. It's horror. It's like horrible to watch. I mean, it's an incredible movie, but like it's really sad.
I read that when I was a kid. Sorry, Andy, on you go.
Yeah, I was going to say my grandfather was in the First World War, and he was a trench inspector. He'd go from trench to trench to trench, and he had some terrible tales about the various horrors that he would encounter on a daily basis. He was a really old man when I was a kid, because he had my mum when he was really quite old as well. But one of his little stories, because the entire feeling of the trenches was otherworldly and almost ghost-like. He credits a ghost for saving his life, because he was going from one trench to the next trench, and it was a lower walkway, so it wasn't as deep as the other ones. A higher walkway, pardon me, meaning that you had to be a bit more careful when you're making your way along it. He was halfway along, and he heard behind him someone shout out Gilbert, which was his name. And he was like, oh, crap, I've got to go back to the other trench. Went back. There was nobody there, because they'd all hiked it off like he told them to the next part. And he was like, turns round, and the entirety of the trench he was going to was bombed out. End to end over the course of 15 minutes. Just wiped out completely. And he just sat there watching it in horror, because that's where he was going. And then looking back at the empty trench going, what saved my life? What saved my life? Yeah. And stories like that were, as much as it's horrific to say, 10 a penny. There were so many tales of just weird stuff. And it's not necessarily because it was weird per se, but it's because it felt weird, and people were hearing things, and people were seeing things, and they were sleep deprived, and many of them were just in horrific conditions. So yeah, I think you're right. It's almost making it more palatable by saying it's all horror and monsters, and look at these things that are out there, rather than saying it is humanity at its very worst, showing its true colors as it industrializes the war machine. And yeah, Granddad.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's a picture. I've got a picture of your granddad with like his 3 brothers, and they're all in uniform. So like 4 of them, and one of them didn't come home, and that's just like a common story, I would say. I know, like in the Second World War, it's like common, and it's like Saving Private Ryan, and it's a bit like passé. But actually, that was true. Like that was the case. It was the case for my family. It was the case for yours. It was probably the case for yours, Mark, if we looked.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, like we got into a really, I know, like, yet again, as Janet says, the real monster was man all along. No, in Trench Crusade. So, Aerith shrugged, this is more onto the production side of things. So, as Trench Crusade started to take shape, what production techniques did you employ to ensure consistent theme, mood, and motif, or did you just go with your gut?
Yeah, it was all kind of pretty much vibe based, I do have it's a little different now because we've started like incorporating more artists that like aren't me, and like other, like, when we brought like Tomas came on, and we started having other people making stuff for Trench Crusade that wasn't just me. But like there's no like laser guns in Trench Crusade. It's so, that's one of the big things in like a lot of sci-fi, because Trench Crusade is kind of like sci-fi fantasy, maybe historical sci-fi fantasy.
Retro sci-fi.
Yeah. But there's no like laser. I wanted everything to feel like believable and grounded, and not be too fantastical. So there might be some sort of like prototype weapon that could be some sort of laser, maybe, but it would be like exceedingly rare like it would, and it probably wouldn't work that well. And like the radiation that leaks from it would probably give you cancer, so like
melting.
Yeah. So that was basically like, it was just put all the things I want into it. And then, because it's just me, I'm the art director and I'm art directing myself. It's like the easiest thing in the world, So yeah, it was just all vibes based generally.
Yeah, when we first talked about it, and I was doing some sketches, you said to me, make sure the weapons feel historically accurate. Although it's not, although it's a fantasized First World War, and you've got breadth. It's an alternative reality, and mankind has been at war with hell for 1,000 years. So it's legitimate to say that perhaps technology marched a little quicker, so you can have weapons from the Second World War in the First World War. You know what I mean? You have a little bit of flexibility there, but you still want stuff that feels very, very first half of the 20th century.
Yeah, like the time frame, like in terms of like tech, kind of runs from like medieval technology that people still use all the way to like early Cold War, like late 40s, early 50s, maybe.
Yeah.
But the main thing is for it to just feel believable. And not be, at least be a little bit grounded, or at least start out grounded, and then you can tweak it and push it. We have like a faction called the Synod of Strategic Prophecy, and they try to communicate directly with God using these like huge like radio telescopes and satellite dishes and stuff. And they're a little more techie, but it's still very like so they have like satellite dishes and things like that, but they're all like run down, and they're missing panels, and nothing's like working properly, and it's all rusty. So that's kind of put rust on it, and that's how you
when all fails, rust it up.
Yeah, because Mark, you've got a story about, was it John Blanche who came in and was just like, Mark, more skulls, because you thought there was never enough skulls. Like what would it be in Trench Crusade, Mike, if you were coming in to like give Mark a stern talking to up his vibe game? The vibe is wrong. What would you say? Like more what? What is the vibe of Trench Crusade?
I really like believable like construction of things. So like if you have a tank or an armor, you can see like the rivets and the hinges and how it's like assembled, and those are the things I really like, get like pretty hot and bothered by. That's the stuff I like.
I've been involved with a couple of projects where it's been sort of at this place where the core ideas are there. Everybody sort of knows what it is, but it's never really been put down on paper. It's currently still in the vibe position where this is what we like, what don't you like? I don't know, I've not seen it yet. And often I've been brought in at this point to do okay, let's now do not the world building, it's done, but the consolidation of the world building, because that's often been my job. So I've come in and said, right, we're now going to lay it all out. So if anyone else comes in, they've got an immediate, loosely speaking, world Bible that they can tap into and understand how it all works.
Yeah, for sure. Bibles and style guides become things at some point, as the breadth of projects grow, you might find,
and often with the breadth of staff as well, as you're hiring maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or maybe even 20 artists, suddenly everything has changed. It's difficult to speak to all of them on the same intimate one-to-one level that you might have if you're just bringing in one person. So having those clear style guides in place is always useful. And just to do a shout out since they're there, I've used World Anvil in 2 of those projects, where we use World Anvil as basically a giant database to store all of the information about the world building, because that's what World Anvil is. World Anvil is just one gigantic database where you can put all of your world building. And it proved to be enormously useful in one project where the writers could just literally drop in and everything was there, easily accessible, all with interconnected links. So it wasn't a giant document, which can often be incredibly intimidating. One of the best world Bibles I ever saw was for a game that I did ages ago. And it was 70 pages long with art spread all the way through. It was beautiful, but it wasn't accessible. And I didn't realize how inaccessible it was until I saw what was a modern database equivalent with the pictures hard-coded into it, everything easily linked through, the writers and where you could communicate with them also all linked inside the whole thing. So you had immediate communication with everybody involved with it as well. It was an enormous difference. But yeah, it's definitely something that as the process develops is something that is a core component of ensuring that no one feels frustrated, because particularly when you start building up towards a large group of artists or writers, it's very easy for them to create stuff that's just not right. And it's not their fault, although sometimes it is, and we don't want to say that. Sometimes it's completely their fault, but it's not their fault if they've not been communicated with well. And the larger the staff pool becomes, the more difficult it is to ensure that those people have been communicated with well.
Yeah. That sounds like a cool program.
It is. World Anvil is great. Not that just because Janet arrived and she happens to be in here right now. I'll speak to you about it afterwards if you want to know more.
I brought up this comment from Infinite Saxon because Warhammer 40k vehicles have always made my head hurt when one considers things like where the crew is supposed to fit within the dimensions. Like Warhammer 40k and Wifrip have always made my head hurt for bigger reasons than this, and that is because first and foremost they're about war, and like everything else seems to be like grafted on after that. Like if they say like necessity is the mother of invention and like surviving war is the most necessary thing, like why would Warhammer Fantasy be at the place it was at like technologically? Anyway, I digress.
I'm going to bring this one up because I think this is an important comment that goes pretty much with it, with that question from World Anvil, because it kind of speaks to that.
Yeah, so question, do you feel, I was just going to say though that I feel like because Trench Crusade is in the real world, you've got, a fantasy real world, you kind of don't need to worry about that in the same way, and so you can just focus on those details that you talked about to make your iteration of the world feel real. Anyway, World Anvil says, question, do you feel like you use Rule of Cool first? If so, how do you like to build your concepts after?
It's kind of a mix of stuff, because like when I'm sitting on the couch sketching, sometimes I'm just trying to like come up with like a vague idea, and so maybe I'll do a sketch and it looks really cool, so that might just be like, okay, I want to turn this into something, and then I'll try to figure out a way, how can I fit it into Trench Crusade, and then I'll look around for ideas, until I get something that feels appropriate. But a lot of times it is just Rule of Cool. It's like whatever I think is awesome, so like I don't know, that's a lot of it, but it's not to say that it's like a shallow, like there's no thought behind any of these like things or how to integrate them into the world or etc. But yeah, I mean the Rule of Cool, that is like really important when you look at something and you get excited by it, so if it's not like, if it's like super accurate, or like it technically, if you're trying to be like really hard sci-fi and it like, this is how it would work in the real world, but then it's like boring. Well then,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wait. Sorry. Oh.
No, you go.
Mark, you go.
Yeah, when I was doing some trench ghost concepts for Mike, and I said, undead, so First World War soldiers, that sounds amazing. And we were talking about sort of the ideas and the concept, the thought behind it, and Mike was very keen to not do your typical gloopy green energy things around them, but because they were the reanimated remains of sort of what had been living units. I was very keen to make sure that you could see they weren't just the original miniatures with a new paint job. So I wanted to demonstrate that these were new things. So I started doing sketches which had sort of like clouds of smoke or soul energy or something around there. And then Mike said, we could want to make them green. So I think, and he suggested, what if they were blood? What if it looked like shadows and smoke rising from blood? And I said, well, what if that stuff is emanating from the points of injury where these previously living units were killed? So there's a big blast from a bullet hole. What if this writhing blood smoke souls energy comes floating out of that? And then there you go. That gives you your groundwork, your concept for building a range out. So it's stuff that real cool, but also some sort of weird internal logic that just sort of backs it up, I think, is always really good.
Yeah.
I've predicated a career on fixing Rule of Cool. And by that I mean a lot of my life has been spent, because I did so much Warhammer over the last 3 decades, taking other people's ideas that made no sense at all but were super fucking awesome, and then going, but how does it work in the real world? Because I'm doing the roleplay one and I have to speak about characters who are engaging with these things. Okay, where did this thing come from? How did it come about? What was the ritual? What is this random goop that's coming out of it, for example? And then trying to ground it in reality while simultaneously boosting it up to 11 every single time, because Warhammer stands at 11 as its base value often, and then dials right up from there at various points. So I am a strong believer in Rule of Cool, because I think that in no way does it stop you from grounding it within the setting that you're doing. You can very easily take something that's just freaking awesome when you look at it. You're like, yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, I love that thing. Why? I don't know. I'm not even sure what's going on here, but it's awesome. And then sit down afterwards and go, it's actually even more awesome, because when you look at why it's these things, this is happening. Everyone goes, oh no, I wish I didn't know that. This is cool, but and that for me is an extremely rewarding process, particularly when, if for example you're working on an IP like Warhammer, where things are often described in completely different ways by different authors at different times, and then you go, I'm just going to accept that they're all real, pull them all in, and then ground it in a way that makes you go, oh wow, that's really clever, as well as super horrible. So I think Rule of Cool is a winner. I think though that grounding it into the reality of the setting at hand is an absolute must though, and that's something that some settings just kind of forget, and they end up just floating away on a fantastical breeze that just doesn't engage people as to the same level, because it's difficult to feel empathic towards that rainbow that goes nowhere and doesn't have any grounded sense. But if you can get a personal touch with something, suddenly it becomes much more real and much more visceral, and that's one of the reasons I think Trench Crusade over on this side is a really good, as we said, capture lightning in a bottle, because it does take all of those things that we already know, we already feel. It adds a twist, but all of those twists are grounded in something, and that's great, just great.
Yeah, so as our yes, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm really sorry. So give me a clue in the comments. So Trench Crusade pretty famously breaks with history in some places, like colonization explicitly not happening, presumably because they were too busy fighting a war with hell to like get out there and spend time colonizing things. There's a big discussion about how that looks in terms of writing, but do you have any perspective on that from the artistic side? And they've added that being navigating about what you decide to break or change versus what you keep continuous, and how you imagine what the new continuity you've created looks like.
I mean, it's in terms of like cultures or civilizations that you might want to see from like some of those, in our world colonized countries. I've done some, like, we're so focused on like the main like war front right now that I haven't really spent much time drawing anything for these other cultures yet. We've talked about it a little bit, and like we've been thinking about it, but there's nothing like really concrete or anything like that. So there are some people I would like to bring on if we do design some of these other cultures. Like, I'd like to get people from that culture to design it. At least I'm thinking mainly from the artistic side. So like if we did sort of like a Aztec civilization, maybe, like, I would love to bring this guy named Andre Rio on. He's a Mexican concept artist. He's really talented. So I would love to do, stuff like that. But, I haven't really had a lot of time to focus on these other cultures yet. But
I have to confess that when I read this, I immediately started thinking, like, would they get mashed potato in the trenches? Like, I went straight to like the absolute detail of what the soldiers might be saying, and would they still get bangers and mash? So I wasn't thinking in quite such a
New World
concept.
potatoes.
Yeah, New World potatoes.
so we did say that like there is limited trade. So there are like cigarettes, and there is like potatoes.
Coffee and potatoes.
Yes,
Good.
exactly.
Okay, good. So they're still going to get mashed potatoes. I feel like, because I think the Great War would be pretty unbearable if you couldn't have mashed potatoes. just a personal feeling how much I like mashed potatoes.
I do too.
Yeah, as our Hiyasu, by the way, has put in the comments that they don't know how to pronounce it either, so we're all good. Even in Europe and the Levant, how do you imagine what, say, Italian architecture might look like with this 800-year distortion of reality, or what architecture in the Holy Land would look like with infernal influence?
I generally just like when you look at Rome, I like all the old architecture, so I would just stick with like that stuff. I wouldn't try to like interpret some like new thing. The infernal influence, I'm not super into. Like in Warhammer, there's like the buildings grow eyeballs and things, and I just don't really like that. So they would probably just look like normal buildings, but they might have like 1,000 corpses draping the outside of the building or something like that, or like they have a big sigil to Beelzebub painted in blood or something. So I wouldn't think like they're like. And like the heretics, like the demons might have their own specific architecture that harkens back to some of that, but it's built like sort of like Barad-dûr from Lord of the Rings or something. But I haven't gotten into that sort of like granularity of like what does, like, I'm not an architect or anything, so like I don't know.
Yeah, you can imagine sort of classical statuary that would depict, that we think of in our world depicting angels and demons would be influenced by the actual demons that are actually running around the world. You know what I mean? So you might get some of that in there. But yeah, I mean, fundamental structures I could imagine consistent.
Mark says you can smash a Swede, surely.
I mean, you can.
Du kan knusa en svenska. It's really rude to say you can mash a Swede. Right, here's some pre-submitted stuff from Per Grant. So these are there's a couple of ones that run on. So crafting world's vision storylines has been a thing that humans have done for eons. It gives meaning to existence. So what is your meaning in creating fictional worlds to explore? Like, what means and needs does it fill for you?
It's like a creative outlet for me. It's one of those things where like you see stuff being made and you're like, oh, I think I could do something better than that. And you just, why not give it a try? I saw this, after working at Blizzard and like seeing like games like Warhammer as over time has gotten like less of like the weird medieval stuff, even in 40K. And it's like a lot of the really dark stuff has gotten like more like with there's like the new Marines, and they look more like tactical and stuff. And I like the more medieval monk vibe that they had. So like just seeing things like that and being like, man, I wish they did it this way. And so, you could go and just do the thing that you want. And that's basically what it was for me. It was just like a outlet to let off steam and things. And so
yeah, it's what I've done my whole life. So it's just it's like breathing. You know,
You can't stop.
No. I feel like lying awake at night sometimes. I get an idea. I hate it when this happens. I get an idea. I get an idea at 3:00 in the morning as I'm going to bed, and then I'll be lying awake going, like, just think about it tomorrow. Don't just let it. Just go to sleep. Just go to sleep. Recharge your batteries. But it's always there buzzing around. So it's like, it's a fundamental part of existence.
Yeah, I would say for me and Andy, like I would say we've spent more time. It must be true. We have spent more time talking about, like, just mathematically speaking, fictional worlds and fictional characters than we have spent talking about our own children, our jobs, our lives. Like we must have done, like, just by a function of how long we've known each other and how long we've spent role playing together. So. Like I dream in character, so that's a whole other vibe that sometimes brings you like I don't often dream useful things to create for characters and worlds, but every now and then you get something. Andy does dream them more often than me, but he can never remember his dreams, so he just wakes up being like, I dreamt something, it was really cool, and I've forgotten it now. Benjamin says Chaos art from the late 80s, early 90s is just a different setting to modern 40k Chaos.
Yeah.
I actually completely agree with you, Mike. Yeah, I also completely agree with Mike. I think like the idea of Space Marines as like space monks is so much cooler and actually just like better fit so they don't turn into these like supremacists, like fascists. If there's space monks and it's pure religion, I think there's something more pure about that, and just I prefer that.
Yeah, and I think like it just feels like maybe the current designers are more inspired by like things like Halo or whatever than like the history of like this kind of stuff. So
it's hard to disagree.
And then another follow-up from Peregradine, who says, why do you think all these RPG worlds that we have been creating for decades have been such a success? Does it fill an esoteric void or need in humanity? And what does Trench Crusade have that others don't?
I think everybody, everyone here, I'm sure, they like this sort of escapism, you know? I don't know. Ever since I was a little boy, like reading Lord of the Rings and like going into that world, and it felt so real. Like the real world was like disappointing, you know, for me anyway.
Especially now.
Especially now. But I think everybody likes this sort of escapism, and what does Trench Crusade have that others don't? It's hard to say, really. Like maybe it just feels a little different. It doesn't feel like maybe like a product exactly, like heavily. I don't really know. I'm not really sure.
Maybe it doesn't do to examine it too closely, just you know what I mean, for fear of that magic evaporating.
I think you can get a nice clean answer, and it's all the things that Mike thinks are fucking cool. That's what it has.
That's what it has.
Up into one place, rather than finding a cool thing over in that setting and a cool thing over in that setting, and a big bad guy over there that kind of rocks the world while the rest of the setting slips into grey. No. It's all of it wrapped up into one Mike-shaped ball that absolutely everyone should get behind. So there you go. That's what Trench Crusade does.
I think the momentum it's gathered as well as it's gone from the art to get to obviously Thomas coming in and writing, and the miniatures starting to come together. I think that the momentum that is built up from that is like that. There's some. I don't speak for you, Mike, but it feels like that has then fueled the engine and drives the creativity on. So it feels that way.
And I think when we released the rules for free, and the rules are by Tomas, I think that was like that got a lot of people, looking at the game, because like people had looked at my art online for a long time, but it wasn't. It's not like this,
I remember when you did the Kickstarter for the big figure.
Oh
yeah. And you were sharing quite a lot of art at that time, going from point to point to point. So you'd gathered quite a large following. Some went off and bought that, but I think there's a significant difference when you start attaching the more broader media to it, like the game, the miniatures, everything else that comes along with it. And instead of it just being pictures, which everybody loves to press like on, now it's something that they can tangibly feel, and they think, I could take that one home, damn straight. Yeah, it's nice.
And I think too with Trench Crusade, because it's like your warband, it's like you can make, and because like our world has such a rich history that you can tap into to make your own warband. Like you could make anything, if you have like, if you have like a particular saint that you think has a cool, like gritty backstory, like Saint Catherine or Saint Bartholomew, who was like skinned alive, and all the statues show him like carrying his own skin. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these. They're incredible.
No, but I was walking past the church. I was walking home the other day, and there was a crucifix, not unknown, outside the church, a big fucking massive one. And I was like, imagine if he'd been hanged. There would be nooses everywhere. Imagine if he'd been boiled, and there would be a cauldron. Like, this is horrific. This is like an instrument of death, just walking down the street. I was shook.
There's a in my village I grew up in, there's a church, St. Peter's Church, and all the crucifixes on the gates are inverted because St. Peter was crucified upside down. So if you didn't know that, you walk past it, you think there was a satanic church in this little Welsh village.
Yeah, I just had this moment of seeing it for what it was, for like imagining like miles and miles of crucified slaves after a slave uprising in Rome. And then like if a Roman just suddenly came here today and would walk around and see all these crucifixes, and it was horrible, and it was dark, and I was scared, so I ran home.
Yeah, what if it had been a guillotine? What if that had been the
exactly, that was the third one, Mark. That was the third one I thought of. The guillotine. I was like, what if there was just a guillotine there? But no, of course I said it guillotine because I was pretending to be French at the time. Anyway, back to Trench Crusade. Thomas's rules are just really fucking smart. It's not a question, it's just a statement.
There you go.
Yeah. So here is a question that we do quite often get from for our guests, which is Rob G1 asks, hi Mike, how did you manage to break into the concept art industry? Any tips or advice for others like myself trying to break in?
So I started doing work for kind of small RPG companies, and that's a pretty good way to get in because the pay is low and the barrier to entry is low, but at the same time the pay is low. So like I guess the best thing to do would be just draw the things that excite you and don't really worry about what you think you need to do to get like work for these people. Maybe this is bad advice, I don't know, but I would just draw the stuff that you love, put together a portfolio with a bunch of stuff, only the best things from it that you love, and then submit it to companies that you want to work at. So the nice thing about RPG companies, like tabletop RPG companies, is that they typically hire people that are more like starting out a lot of times, at least in my experience. So if you want to work at like Blizzard or something right off the bat and you don't have any experience and your portfolio is bad, you're just not going to get hired. So, I mean, it's not to say that like a tabletop RPG company is going to hire you if your portfolio is bad, but usually like there's a little bit more like flex based on like the pay. So I would just do that.
Yeah, so the advice is draw, practice, draw. Don't be like those people that go on Great British Bake Off and haven't baked all the cakes. Like, I hate those fucking people. Andy and I are always complaining about them. I don't really watch reality TV because it's too annoying. Because, like, you go on the British Bake Off or you go on a sewing bee and you haven't made a shirt. And we're like, why would you go on this show if you haven't made all the clothes?
Yeah.
Same applies.
I think the other big thing is to be, like, brutally honest with yourself and to look at how you stack up against the competition, right? So like if you're submitting all this stuff and you're like, I'm just not getting jobs, they don't know what's right, it's like, and be real honest with yourself and be like, why am I not getting these jobs? And you know, and usually it's because your portfolio is not good enough, unless you're like a total jerk or something.
Yeah, certainly you do have to look at the competition. You have to, you know, if you want to go and work at a let's say, as we was talking about Blizzard, if you want to work on World of Warcraft, we all see what World of Warcraft art looks like. We're all familiar with the concept art. You can find it all online. Most of the artists that work, they have portfolios. You be honest with yourself and say, does my work measure up? You know, it doesn't. You don't necessarily have to measure up with the very best if it's a junior position, but you know, you've got to be able to hold it. You know, you've got to be able to hold a candle to it, and so to some extent, for sure.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, cool.
No, go.
I was just going to say, I've been in a position where I've been hiring all manner of folk, and really, all it boils down to is practice, practice, practice. And then when you're applying for a job, you make sure that the art that you're offering in your portfolio is adjacent to what they're doing.
Yeah.
There's a very different feel for, say, World of Warcraft, the cartoony, over-the-top ones, in comparison to, say, a medieval-facing game like, say, Pendragon. They are so very different, and if you submit one style of portfolio to get the job, you're not going to get it, even if you're very good.
Yeah, because you'd often find that recruiters don't have the imagination to make the jump. You know, you might submit a beautiful WoW style portfolio, but you're trying to get hired to work on Warhammer, and you'd like to think that, no, you can see I can do the work, but no, you need to show them exactly what they're expecting to see. Otherwise, you know, what's going on, Lindsay?
Sorry, my phone just died.
Oh, right.
You didn't miss anything. We were just filling in for you.
I could hear you the whole time. You just couldn't see me. Yeah. I blame an intern.
Super slick.
Yeah. I don't know what happened there, but I'm back. But actually, that has brought us to the end of the stream. So, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Please do, everybody, check out Trench Crusade. Yeah, Andy, stop taking off my comments from the screen. You'd think I had just dropped out of the stream or something. Thank you to Mark, thank you to Andy, thank you to Mike, and of course, thank you to all our patrons who keep our streams beautifully ad-free. And we will see you all again for another edition of Inside the Rookery next week, same time, same place. Until then, goodbye and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.